Hi, I'm Adam Steele and this is my studio, and no, you can't intern in my studio. Okay, so as much as the intro sounds a bit like a punchline from a joke, I'm actually kind of serious, but at this point I want to try and explain why, not just in my case, but why in so many cases you will, maybe as a younger engineer, be reaching out to studios and constantly either getting ghosted or just getting a reply of no. I'm going to try and explain a bit of why that is. Firstly, I'm going to rewind back to the 1980s, 1990s, maybe even early 2000s, when the recording studio industry was big business. Everybody was still recording on tape machines up to a certain point, and hiring out a studio, pretty much any studio really, was quite expensive. Partly because running tape machines is not cheap, partly because the actual tape itself isn't cheap, but by extension then, actually running a studio is quite an expensive venture, which means that to get into a studio, you probably had to be quite good and be signed to a label, and then the label would front a significant amount of cash, or you would have saved up for a significant amount of time to pay for some serious studio time. You couldn't record at home really because home tape machines were rubbish. You wouldn't have been able to do things like, you know, the home recording revolution that we've got now. As a result, because of like the complexities of running an analog session with tape and a big mixing desk where everything had to be handwritten down in case of recall, in case the band calls the next week and goes, that was great, but we needed to change something, which is no small task like it is today, where I can just open the project and just go tweak. Back then, it meant completely recalling everything because almost nothing would have been motorized. Only the most ridiculously expensive desks from people like Solid State Logic would have even had motors in the faders, the volume faders, but not anything else. But that's like $500,000 mixing desks. Those were the stuff of dreams for almost everybody, including kind of a lot of the major league studios. This meant that you would have needed the producer, the engineer who sat in the chair, maybe an assistant engineer who made sure the tape machine wasn't going wonky, made sure that all the gear was holding together, made sure that all the microphones and everything were right in the right place in the live room, whilst the main engineer watched all the analog dials in here and made sure everything worked properly. Because of course there wouldn't have been much in the way of remote control of like, I can now load up on my phone a connection to Reaper, which is what I use, and walk into the live room and I can move faders remotely. You couldn't do that, so you needed an assistant engineer. Both of those guys would have been super busy, which means that you might have got the T-boy in, you know, an intern who would look after the bands. They're paying a huge amount of money to be here. We want them to be catered to, make sure they've got a cup of coffee or a cup of tea all the time. Make sure that, you know, if you run out of pencils or paper for all the, you know, writing down the settings, you could go, intern, can you go to the shop and buy me some paper? You know, obviously preparation, you would hope that doesn't happen, but, you know, anything can happen in a studio, and so these studios would be recording 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and so having an extra body in the room that you don't have to pay and in return they get to learn was probably a great benefit. Fast forward to today, there isn't any of that anymore. Tape has all but vanished, everything's digital, and because of that, everything is digital recall, which means that the cost of running a studio has inevitably, well, should have gone down, but then taxes and inflation and everything, it's not gone up. Let's put it that way. But then, like I said earlier, the home recording revolution has come and stomped its foot all over a lot of the industry. Because a lot of the people who would have saved up and up for months and practiced their songs at home and then come in and recorded, now just do that at home. which means that a lot of these studio bookings that used to be just staples all the time just don't exist. This isn't what I would call a major label studio. It's maybe a little bit bigger than a project studio. I can record a full band at once. You know, I've got some serious facilities in here, but we're not at the massive kind of stage somewhere like Air Studios or Real World Studios, which is Peter Gabriel's place, that kind of place. Those are like multi-million-pound facilities, and we're not quite at that level, which means that we don't get often Sony, you know, EMI, Universal, those kind of guys knocking on my door and going, I need to book you out for a month. Is that because I'm not good enough? I'll leave that for you guys to decide, but generally speaking, I think it's just the way that the industry has gone. I do still have clients in here, but it's not constant, it's not all the time. And I personally have moved into YouTube and education and video work and all that kind of stuff, which is a whole different world from a pure recording studio. This is a lot of the time very much a glamorized film set. I do videos like where I'll compare different speakers or compare different pieces of equipment. That is very much not traditional recording studio stuff. And it's not glamorous apart from, you know, there's the bit that I filmed to camera like this where I'm talking to you now. But if I'm comparing two pieces of equipment, that might be a couple of hours of me getting everything exactly right with tape measures and just sitting in silence and evaluating A, B, and being, you know, here in absolute silence and really kind of getting particular about those kinds of things. Which isn't interesting, and it's not something you can learn from as an intern. And furthermore, it's not something that can be helped either. This is something that I think is also a big part of why it's difficult to intern in a studio these days, is that because a lot of this stuff is sit quietly and click a mouse all the time, which is how I work, and I like working like that, it means that it's not very conducive to kind of passive teaching, where I think the very physical setup of running a tape machine and physically moving the faders and moving the compressors and everything, if a young 17, 18-year-old was to sit on that sofa there and watch me do that, they would learn a fair amount just from watching me do that. Whereas trying to look over my shoulder when I'm clicking at a computer, you're not going to learn much unless you start asking, what's that? What are you doing? What's that? What's that? What's this? That's that? At which point I go, shut up, I'm trying to work. Which isn't nice, and I don't like doing things like that, and I don't generally say things like that, but that I know is what would be in the back of my mind in that circumstance. Plus, like I was saying earlier, with the kind of producer, engineer, assistant engineer, intern kind of hierarchy, I mean, that's a big studio setup, but it might have been producer, engineer, intern, you know, intern gets promoted to assistant engineer or whatever it may be. Maybe the producer is the engineer, but you would still have an assistant. Now that's all gone, and it's a one-man band doing everything, which, again, I don't begrudge that. I like doing that. That suits the way that my mind works. But it means that there is no stepping stone. There's no kind of getting into the next position and learning the basics, like how to patch a patch bay, before going all the way up to, right, you're running the session, run this wrong and you're screwed. So if you don't want interns, what do? Well, it might sound weird, but, and I mean this genuinely, I mean this hand on heart, watch YouTube. It sounds really stupid to say it, but YouTube didn't exist even when I started learning. I started studying this at university in 2004, and YouTube didn't exist till 2006, and it didn't have anything good on it, at least in terms of this world, until at least 2010, 2011. I had already produced several albums by that point. I mean, they might not have been amazing, but I'd done it. I'd been out there and done it before there was anyone who I could watch on the internet in video form and go, maybe I'll try that. Why have I not tried that? You know, what's that guy doing? what I do on YouTube, even now, even as a relatively seasoned, mix engineer, recording engineer, I still watch those kind of YouTube videos trying to learn new tricks and techniques and kind of brush up on my skills all the time, because I'm in a constant state of learning. It's constant professional development, trying to be better at my craft. But that was not there. Now, anybody in the world can watch over the shoulder of great engineers, even average engineers. They can watch tutorials on, like, this is what EQ does, this is what compression does, this is what reverb and delay does. Shameless plug for my Audio Essentials course with ProMix Academy. They can watch courses on, this is how Pro Tools works, this is how Reaper works. Again, shameless plug for the Ultimate Reaper Guide. You can watch so many things that will prime you to be in the situations where the technical knowledge you can have absolutely down pat if you decide to put the hours in, which is exactly the same as interning in studios back in the 80s and 90s. You could stand there with your mouth open and just drool on the floor and serve people bad coffee, and you wouldn't be asked back as the intern, and you wouldn't make it in the industry. But if you were smart and applied yourself and actually actively learned and were keen and picked things up and made sure you put into practice what you learned, you might be asked back, you might get promoted, you might be brought up, eventually maybe either run a session yourself or run your own studio. Now that process doesn't really exist. I'm sure there are interns, the one or two at some of the bigger studios, but getting an internship like that now is like winning the lottery, because statistically it doesn't exist. It does exist, but statistically, like, it might be, you might find interns in 10 studios in the UK with a population of 70 million. Good luck. But the knowledge that is available to you now, whether it's free or whether it's with paid courses, all that kind of stuff has never been there before and is all at your fingertips. All you have to learn right now is how to ask the right questions. If you can not just ask, what is this, but why is this? Why am I doing this? Why should I not do that? And start asking good questions. Then you'll be able to search YouTube, search tutorial lessons, and explain answers using your own words and your own methods. And you'll be able to very quickly get to a point that I didn't get to till well after my entire education. If I'd interned at a studio, that wouldn't have helped me very much, other than maybe inspiration. Inspiration's great, but the other thing is you want to be doing this for a job. I mean, you wouldn't be interning for 2 weeks and suddenly have a job in the industry. Even now, I mean, you might be doing it for 6 months or a year before they even think about giving you a decent wage, because you're not at the level where you can be, given responsibilities of looking after major label artists or, all that kind of stuff. But, everything is out there for you. So, go get it. Sorry this was a bit of a rambly one. Hope this was inspiring for some of you. And now I've got a video that I can send to everybody who emails me and says, can I intern in your studio? But yeah, thank you everybody for watching. If you were never asking that question to begin with, maybe you can send this, if you're an engineer, to people who've been asking you the same question. But yeah, anyway, thanks to our patrons on Patreon who help support us and keep the lights on around here, especially these filming lights. They cost a fair bit to run. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.